Hi guys, and welcome to week 4. In this week we're going to cover off running mechanics for sports performance. So what I'm going to go over today is I'm going to run you by sort of our philosophy around running, how we categorise different types of running, and how we look to train. We're going to touch on our training theory, so what we're actually looking at targeting from a quality perspective and what we're actually trying to address with our training. We're going to have a quick look at how we assess what we need to work on with people. Then we're going to go into some prescription, so some exercise prescriptions specifically to running. And then we're going to look at how we apply these to sports settings. So firstly, guys, in a nutshell, to me, running is the most natural form of locomotion humans have. We're built for land-based activities. We're built to run, just looking at the human structure. With that being said, we must ensure we maintain the skill, capacity, and functionality of this ability throughout our lifetime. Now, it might be part of our sport, it might be part of a way of keeping fit, it might be a part of a way to escape danger, but fundamentally it's something that we should try to preserve throughout our lifetime as long as possible. And today I really want to cover that, the essence of running and the main elements of running. So without being able to assess running ability, we are essentially doing a disservice as performance coaches. It pertains to so many different sports and so many different aspects. And even for sports that don't directly relate to running, they're going to have times in their life when they're going to need to be able to run. And if they can't do it well, then that's going to act as a risk factor going forward into their sport. As I said, running is an integral part of the majority of competitive sport. We must treat it with the same intention. So yes, sports require different amounts of skills. Yes, they require different training qualities. And it's generally assumed that everyone can run. But more often than not, it's that assumption that acts as a dangerous element. So we really want to make sure that we're giving it the attention it deserves. And quite simply, if we do not use it, we lose it. So if we are not training running consciously, if we are not aware of our deficiencies or potentially our strengths, then we cannot use it and we cannot address it. So we really need to make sure that we're always continuing elements of it within the training environment. So moving more into how we categorize it, the key types of running we look at are sprinting, accelerating, change of direction, steady state, and gain-specific running. Now we're going to touch on these sprinting, acceleration, and change of direction in the next couple of weeks. And it's the steady state and the gain-specific stuff that we're going to look at today that's going to apply to these two different qualities. The key thing I want you to understand with our philosophy is we want to think about developing the quality. So we want to think about developing sprinting, developing acceleration, developing change of direction, and then obtaining the ability to execute that. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. Develop the quality, obtain the ability to apply that to our sports setting. When we're looking at sort of how we train this, there's 3 key components that we look to influence running performance. And they are motor control, physiological capacity, so energy systems, and our movement function capacity. And this is really the robustness of functionality of our arms, legs, our physical structures. So we then break this down to 3 key areas that we train, and that is technique, energy systems, and our muscle systems. And what I like to think about this is a computer hardware software system. So if we break it down to 3 categories, you think about sort of your computer or your laptop, each computer or laptop has a software that allows the system to run. And that is essentially our nervous system controlling our technique and our motor control and how we move. We then need electricity to power the system, and that's our energy systems. So that's what's fueling us, allowing us to move and perform these efforts. And then finally, we have our muscle systems, which is ultimately our hardware or the shell of the computer. It's the size of the RAM and the space and all those things that go into making the computer what it is essentially the outer shell. And so if we sort of think about developing these 3 qualities, without one of these qualities, the system doesn't work. The system is inefficient. And by enhancing each one of these 3 qualities, we add to the capacity of the computer. So if we improve the screen size, which in this case would be the muscle system, then we're improving the quality of the experience. If we increase our power output, so the computer's ability to uptake more power, work more efficiently, then again, we're starting to improve our energy systems. And if we start to learn more proficient movement patterns, our software systems start to improve and we run off less bugs and less errors. So specifically looking at each category, when we're looking at motor control, we're referring to the ability to perform a set of motor skills or a set of movements. These can be influenced from technical interventions, so coaching strategy-based sessions where we're looking at technical enhancement, which comes from assessment, analysis, and execution. It can also be limited or decreased by our mobility, stability, or previous injuries. And so these are the three elements that influence our ability to uptake information and to further learn neurally how to perform these movements. And especially if you have an injury. If we have an injury, we're generally creating an inhibition to a movement pattern, and we generally create an incorrect plasticity within the brain or a neural synapse, which causes us to develop different movement patterns. And it's this motor control experience or the skills learning experience where we're trying to address that. Our physiological capacity largely dictates the physical performance output of an individual. This is really where we need to understand that the level of fitness for someone is ultimately the most important characteristic. It predominantly relates to the performance of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems, and further to that, the buffering systems that allow us to uptake, produce, and remove waste products. Now, it acts as a ceiling for what athletes are capable of. So what's important to understand about this is that we can really refine someone's movement patterns. We can make them strong and robust. But ultimately, if they do not have running capacity, if they do not have energy system development, then this will be the factor that stops them performing. More often than not, and it is quite frustrating to accept, but lots of successful athletes actually move poorly and could actually benefit from being a lot stronger. But because they have that physiological development from an energy system perspective, they're able to compete and operate at a really high level. The frustrating thing with that is if we're able to improve their motor control, improve their movement capacity, we can influence their performance even more. And that's why this three-tiered approach is a really, really good way to look at how we can enhance performance. Because if someone's doing really well in one category, there's so much scope for improvement in the other categories. And they also start to improve each other. And the final one I want to talk about, guys, is movement capacity and function. So this refers to the joint mobility, stability, and durability of the athlete's body. Dysfunction will most likely inhibit motor control. So what I was saying there earlier, if we have movement dysfunction or movement issues, then the ability to perform motor control tasks is going to be influenced, or motor skills will be influenced. And it can indirectly affect physiological capacity because it's going to reduce the amount of work that can be done. Again, if we do not have our optimum movement capacity reached, or if there is space to improve our robustness and physical structure of our bodies, then there is ability to continue to do more training load. And that's really what we want to do. We want to build a robust, strong, functioning athlete, so then they can handle more training load, which is going to allow further development of those cardiovascular and respiratory systems. So looking at training these qualities, guys, when we're looking at technique, our main goal is to create autonomy of a movement in a given pattern. So we're trying to identify an area of a movement pattern in which there might be a deficiency or an opportunity to enhance, and we're trying to address that. The more untrained the athlete, the slower or the more basic the technique drill needs to be. And this is really important that we're reaching them on their level of capacity. So we want to make sure that we're not making the challenge too hard and we're allowing that learning experience to take place. The type of feedback is really critical. So we need to match the teaching style with the learning style. If someone's a visual learner, we need to be really good demonstrators. If someone's an auditory learner, we need to speak with clear, concise instructions, and so on. It's about finding that mix, and everyone's going to be different, and that's why it's really important to go into that social aspects of understanding your athletes as well. The drill progression must create context for the bigger picture. And so when we go into the prescription section later, and I'll talk about that, is we want to make sure the drill leads on to the next drill. And so what I really don't mind happening is if an athlete can execute a drill really well, I want them to dominate that exercise. So then when we go to the next progression, the complexity or the dual processing that has to take place is already automatic for half of it. So for example, if I'm doing a drill that only requires one focus area and they're making that no worries, fantastic. When we go to the two focus area with that previous focus area included, they're still only going to have to focus on one task because they've made the first task automatic. And that's really what we're trying to look at, layering drills and building progressions in that regard. A key thing we want to do is we want to focus on the biggest bug first. And the reason for this is because it will self-correct others. So if we notice a really clear dysfunction and a really noticeable big rock dysfunction, addressing that first will generally have a ripple effect and will start to clean up minor issues as well. And that's something you start to develop with your coaching experience. Above all, we want to make sure you apply the 4 phases of competence model, which I talked about in week 1, where you're understanding where they fit in the consciously competent scale. So if they're unconsciously incompetent, we need to build that context. If they're consciously competent, then we need to challenge their feedback and allow them to work it out themselves. Okay, energy systems. Again, this doesn't pertain too much to running mechanics, but the overall running philosophy is a really key ingredient. There are 3 key steps we need to take. So we need to understand the athlete's current capacity. What is their fitness level? We need to assess the capacity they need to have. So what is the demand or the level they're trying to achieve that's going to make them successful, and where are they at with that? So we need to compare where they're at to where they need to get to. And then from that, we need to address their deficiency. So if there's a clear deficiency based on that information, then that's what we need to target. And that might be a specific energy system. It might be a specific area where they need to get better within that sport. Further to that, we categorize aerobic and anaerobic really simply. In a training sense, we want to do aerobic work any which way. So with our access, basic cross training is going to have a really good effect. So working extensively and exposing to long steady state periods is going to have a really big benefit. I know this gets talked about less and less these days, but there's a strong reason for that, and that's from a training fatigue perspective and from a stimulus perspective. We can get really great stimulus at a very low training fatigue from doing low intensity steady state work, which a lot of people overlook now, which for me now becomes a low hanging fruit, because if we have athletes going in and out of sports, them coming to us, or if we can prescribe extra work away in a recovery modality or something of the like, then we can get that really low hanging fruit because they're not doing it anywhere else. And most likely their competition is not doing it anywhere else. When we're moving to more anaerobic development, I believe it's much more beneficial to do it in a running-based environment. There's no doubt there's some great pieces of equipment where you can get energy system development that way. But if we're trying to improve running-based sports anaerobically, which is when we start to move into more of the game running, we need to be hitting this with actual running patterns. And this one's going to sound really stupid when you say it out loud, but it's amazing how little people do it. Sprinting is the #1 way to improve running speed. I'll repeat that again. Sprinting is the #1 way to improve running speed. Everyone wants to get bigger, everyone wants to get stronger, everyone wants to get more powerful. But ultimately, if we want to get faster at moving from A to B on our feet, then we need to sprint, and we need to sprint well. Okay, there are 3 really key training elements we need to be focusing on. The last one is increasing top speed and increasing aerobic capacity can increase both gain speed and match fitness. And this is a really simple concept as well. I want to think about is that if I can improve the top speed quality of an individual, and at the same time, if I can improve their aerobic capacity, everything within those 2 qualities will improve. So any anaerobic threshold work, any repeat sprint work will have some sort of indirect benefit from developing those 2 qualities. The cool thing about looking at developing those 2 qualities is the fatigue elements are completely different. And in some cases, the aerobic activity actually works to recover from the speed work. So adding in those completely different variables within the training week can work really well to develop qualities and then develop fitness across the spectrum. And so that's a really important thing to think about as well, is how does one training quality combined with another training quality improve indirect training qualities? All right, and the last one is our muscle systems. This is really simple, guys, and we don't need to go into too much detail on it. Most people that are working in strength and conditioning now are more than comfortable prescribing resistance-based training. But there's some really key important things I want to understand about I want you guys to understand about how it applies to running. And this is the first one. Basic resistance training performed well will benefit any running-based athlete, period. Okay? There is no one who hasn't done any strength training who then incorporates some strength training won't see benefits, as long as the performance of the movement is done well. The key elements that we're actually getting benefit from are we're increasing the motor control of the movement patterns. So we're increasing proprioception, awareness, intermuscular coordination, movement feedback is really important too. We're increasing the capacity for oxygen uptake. So this is probably the biggest one you can sell to an aerobic athlete or a running-based athlete who doesn't participate in strength work, is that you're increasing the muscle's ability to uptake more oxygen, allowing it to move and operate more efficiently and effectively. We increase the motor control, mobility, and stability specifically. So now we're starting to look at how we can influence balance, coordination, control in a dynamic plane of movement. We're increasing the overall muscle capacity. Okay, so what we're talking about with this is we're basically increasing the work a muscle can do. And this is going to allow us to train more often, more frequently, and increase our overall training capacity. The last one is obviously we get a decreased chance of injury. And the reason for this is that we're building more robustness and more resilience within the body structures. So we're increasing the body's tolerance to stress and load. So therefore, when it is applied to a stress or load, we start to see benefit. And I've got the two images there, guys, of the MacBook Pro and the desktop computer. And what we sort of see now is that the MacBook Pro is a slimline version of all those qualities we're trying to develop. It does everything the desktop does, but every little detail is refined, every little element is put into it, and the overall product is a sublime, superior product. And that's essentially what we're trying to do, is we're trying to upgrade the qualities of individuals so we don't have to have a speaker attachment. The speaker is now built into the computer. We don't need an extra mouse anymore. The hard drive to store all the space can be so much more reduced. And this is what basically taking someone from a beginner to a professional athlete can do, is that we can start to develop these qualities so everything becomes more efficient, more effective, more valuable, and overall a high-performing product or a high-performing athlete. One thing that's really important to understand is KPIs, or key performance indicators, that we're looking for within movement. And specifically in running, and there'll be some crossover here as we touch on speed and acceleration next week, and then further to that, change of direction qualities. But these are the main ones that apply to general, overall running patterns that we want to see. The first one is foot ground contact position. So we want to see the foot touch down supination, and it should rotate or roll into a pronation stance. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail and how we look at that sort of in the practical. We want to see an arm position relative to the leg position, and this refers to the rate, frequency, and speed the legs are moving at. So ultimately, the further in front of the body the right knee is, the further behind the right arm should be. At the same time the right knee is coming in front of the body, the left arm should be coming in front of the body. And so what we want to see here is that contralateral coordination, where the opposite side of the body is working within unison with the other side of the body. And this basically ensures that we're running with greater efficiency, greater coordination, speed, flow, and rhythm. And these are really the artistic elements of running that we want to see visually, and that give us an indication that performance is being maximized. We want to look at spinal posture, and the big clue for this is the head, shoulders, and hips. So we want to see a nice steady head with a neutral neck, which will mean the eyes are looking straight ahead. The shoulders should be doing minimal lateral rotation, so there will be some movement as the shoulders oscillate. And same thing with the hips, but what we want to see is we want to see the shoulders and the hips in a linear position. So we don't want to see a stooped back with the shoulders well and truly in front of the body. There might be at times, especially in accelerating, which we'll talk about again next week, where the shoulders will be in front of, but there should be a linear position from the shoulders to the hips, which will basically dictate a neutral spine, which is really what we want to see for a force management perspective. So we're not leaking force. The toe push-off position is a really good indication, especially for running mechanics. Now, when we're doing speed mechanics, this happens a lot easier. But what we want to see is we want to see the foot is pushing off the inside edge or the ball of the big toe as opposed to the outside edge. What can tend to happen with runners, and especially distance runners, is that they'll live in supination, so they'll live on the outside edge of the foot, especially under fatigue, because the lateral and the medial stabilizers of the ankle joint will start to fatigue and generally cause an imbalance. And so we want to train the mechanism of pushing off the inside edge. And we'll do a test with this on Friday so you can see the force output difference at an effort level is much more significant pushing off the inside edge as opposed to the outside edge. And you also see the relationship of that foot position and how it affects other movements, including jumping and change of direction, that sort of stuff. The other one we want to see is the free leg ankle dorsiflexion. So we want to see the leg that is not moving is maintaining dorsiflexion. Sorry, the leg that's not on the ground is maintaining dorsiflexion. So upon ground contact, it's in a force absorbing position. When the foot strikes down with the ground, a good indication, despite the speed we're moving at, is that the elbow will be by the side of the body. And as I mentioned before, when the foot contacts the ground, we want to see the toes dorsiflexed at landing. And this will ensure a really good force absorption position. Okay, guys, so when we're assessing it, this is basically what we're going to go through, or what we like to collect, and this is going to allow us to prescribe exercises or different prescriptions for different techniques and different technical errors assessment fixes. So It starts the moment they walk in the door, and this is through their body language, posture, speech, personality, etc. A really common trait when we're looking at running is that sprinters will generally demonstrate a fast tone, an intense body language, and generally a confident personality. Whilst distance runners, generally speaking, are going to be more reserved, quiet, and a bit more reactive. And now this sort of goes without saying, but it just allows you to start to process how you should be communicating with this person and what techniques you can use to sort of make sure you're educating them in a correct manner and making sure that they're focusing on the key elements. One thing when we are analysing running technique is that it can be very subjective and it can be very minor, the details we look at. So if you're speaking to sort of someone who's quite intense and quite responsive to any sort of feedback, you might find that they might overanalyze elements of it and they might underanalyze unimportant elements. So a really good key thing to start analysing what sort of person they are. You can also start to see from their general movements, are they stiff, upright, are they lax, are they hypermobile, all these sorts of things you can start to see just in their body language. How do they sit on a chair? Do they sit closed and restricted, or do they sit open? Do they look like their breath's under control? All these little elements that you pick up over time. Our main overarching analysis is a kilogram analysis, and we'll touch on this specifically in the speed and acceleration because it directly pertains to that. But everyone who does a running analysis, we will conduct a kilogram analysis. There are some slight variations if we're not looking at specifically top speed. We're going to do walk, jog, and run comparison videos. So looking at how people's movement patterns change from a walking speed to a jogging speed and a running speed. This is generally done off a basic APE scale. So your walk, you're looking at a 1 to 2, maybe 3 effort, depending on their fitness levels. A jog is sort of a 3 to 5. And then a run, you're looking at someone trying to run at 7 to 8 out of 10 effort. We do a foot analysis. So we just look at the foot cycle, specifically its supination to pronation pattern, front, side, and rear angles. We do a drill walkthrough. So I'm going to go through a bunch of the drills in a second. And then in most cases, we'll do a movement capacity tests or extension range of motion tests. And generally we'll use the FMS. We might do some specific unilateral exercises to just assess joint capacity as well. So when we're looking at prescription, I'm not going to go into too much detail with this. You guys can use this as a bit of a database or a resource sheet. These are the general exercises we do and the general order that we progress them in terms of what we're looking at. So to give you an example, general running, we want to build some elastic tolerance. And this can be achieved with ankle jumps, both forwards and backwards, and lateral jumps. The reason we do lateral is because we're trying to build robust athletes. So forcing in some lateral movement exposes them to all the variables they could face in their sports. We're trying to generally develop tendon stiffness and elastic capacity. We then like to progress that to a split ankle jump. So this is really forcing load off the back toe. Then we start to move into more of the coordination drills. So we're looking at the A march, which is a general marching pattern, and we're ensuring that the arms and legs are coordinated. The ankle pump, which is similar to the A march, but we're starting to roll through a foot cycle where we go from heel to toe and push with the big toe. We go to an A skip and a triple A skip. Okay, so just general skipping drills. I've got a video of that too, which we'll go through in detail so you can have that as a bit of a resource. Now on the right, there are some key coaching cues. What I want to focus on and what you'll notice is the further down the drills we go, the less the cues are there and the less they're more focused on having internal and external cueings. And the reason for this is that we hope that the drills build context. So the thing about the jumps is it builds elastic qualities. So when we go to the skips, we're hoping to get some of that stiffness transference. So those cues that we use in the early drills are sort of subconsciously there in the later drills, allowing us to focus on different elements in those later drills. So again, use this as a resource going forward. Once we're competent in that, we start to introduce some dribble drills. And the dribble drills are really good for teaching cyclical action at smaller ranges of motion. So if you think about someone running at high speed or in their running motion, it's very hard to be consciously aware. Generally, your stride frequency and stride length is happening too quickly for you to control or gain consciousness in. So we do ankle dribbles, calf dribbles, and knee dribbles. And what these are cyclical jogging or running drills at smaller ranges of motion. So the ankle dribble, imagine you have a rod sticking out of your ankle joint and we're stepping over that in a running cycle. For the ankle dribble, we're going to be predominantly on the heels. The calf dribble, the rod will move up to the mid shin, and the knee dribble, that rod will be coming out of the knee. And then we're just transitioning to the knee will continue to get taller and taller, and we're constantly trying to draw a circle with that leg. The transition dribble is a transition from the ankle to the knee dribble. So you're asking someone to start dribbling at the ankle, through the calf, and then into the knee position. These will obviously be much simpler to understand in practical, and also with the video that I provide. There's some coaching cues to look at there too. And one thing we want to focus on too is the foot position. So one thing we want to understand is, and this is the reason I don't focus on it too much, because it should happen naturally. And this is why if we have good dorsiflexion and good ankle stiffness, it's not an issue, is that your foot contact is actually irrelevant. It should be a byproduct of a movement. And so the slower we're moving, we're going to be more heel dominant, and the faster we're moving, we're going to be more toe dominant. But the bias is to always maintain dorsiflexion in the ankle. The reason we want to maintain dorsiflexion is because it's going to maintain active elastic tension in the ankle. We will push through plantar